Hello, coaches. Welcome back to the Coaches Rising podcast. It's all about how to become a more impactful and effective coach. I'm Joel Monk, and this is podcast number 9 with Carole Griggs today, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics. We're going to be speaking about consciousness and coaching. Carole advocates that as coaches, we can coach from what she calls the ground of being, which is this spacious presence at the heart of who we are. And really not many coaching schools mention this place. So you may be wondering, well, what's the point? But I think many beautiful qualities start to infuse our coaching the more we're able to open to it. You know, those moments when we're feeling effortless, there's an ease and we're deeply present and attuned with our clients. Those moments happen more often the more we access this place. So what are we going to explore today? Well, we'll explore what is consciousness? How can we develop it? How does it impact the coaching? Carole will share with us her I-Conscious model for human development, which is really these 5 domains of our awakening, that we can work out where we are on this model and then do specific practices for where we're at, which accelerates our development. So Carole she's an author. She's the author of Space to See Reality. She's a PhD in professional coaching, an executive coach, and the co-creator of this I-Conscious model that I just spoke about. And if you're inspired by this podcast, I'd love to just get the word out to as many coaches as possible. So you can head to coachesrising.com/podcasts. And on each individual page of the speakers, you'll find on the right-hand side, there's a kind of share bar. You could just click on that and share it to social media. Or you could just simply tell other coaches about the podcast. I just want to get as many people benefiting from it as possible. So we're going to begin now. And Carole's going to start by telling us what is the ground of being and what is it like when we coach from that place. How's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. Yeah, I'm excited to dive in today. I think we're kindred spirits around this topic that I want to explore with you today, which is kind of like this intersection between spirituality and coaching. I read your book recently, Space to See Reality, and really enjoyed that. So I'd love to kind of dive in today. I know you're doing a lot of executive coaching and other cool things, and we can explore this today and see where it takes us.
Great. I look forward to it. It's one of my favorite topics is how the coach shows up, how they identify themselves, what's going on in their internal world, and what happens with the space between them and the client.
I want to start by asking you about your model, this space to see reality model. I know it's kind of starts from a very different premise than maybe a lot of other coaching models or kind of philosophies. So maybe you could just give us a kind of overview of like what you're advocating for, what this model is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a big question. Thank you for that. In my book, I use the terms ground of being. That is not the most common term in executive coaching. It's not the kind of terminology I typically use with my clients. But there's a spaciousness, an empty, open spaciousness that I can talk about that feels a little more tangible. And it's a clearing, it's an opening, it's a space where thinking is kind of parted, or thoughts can be seen, but there's no attachment to that exclusively. So there's a meeting that's very connected, and connected is not even the right word, because connected insinuates that there's something that connects to something else, when in reality it's you and I connecting as this one seamless being, and meeting from that ground of being, coaching from that ground of being. Is in my experience where all the transformative possibilities really start to arise. It's kind of like what I say, it's where the magic happens, because it has nothing to do with me, really. Obviously I have skill sets and background and experience and tools and things like that I utilize. but it's very organic. It's very just whatever is needed in the moment. That's what arises and comes out as I'm working with people.
Before I ask you about the quality of that space, you're mentioning some of the qualities of it and like what happens when you coach from there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to kind of like juxtapose that with a lot of coaching literature and the way people experience themselves, which, they may not be aware of this term ground of being or spaciousness or experience themselves in that way. And I wonder if you could maybe talk about like how is it different? Like what's this other side like with a lot of coaching literature is pointing towards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that what's the difference between the coaching from the ground of being per se and then traditional coaching? Would that be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest differences is how the coach identifies himself, who I know myself to be, who am I? And it sounds like maybe some cliche term or, but really that's what it boils down to is who am I and who do I know myself to be? Am I this confined being that's stuck inside of the skin and I'm a personality and I'm Carole and I'm this and I'm that and I all these identifications. So am I coaching through the filters of all these identifications and belief structures, which is what most coaches are doing. And they often have an agenda, and sometimes an agenda is really good. And sometimes an agenda can really get in the way of what needs to happen within that coaching scenario. So when one is coaching from the ground of being, there's a fluidity and a connection and a flow that can start to take place, and what needs to arise can arise without me trying to control it. Traditional coaching, there's often goals and things like that, and not that you can't have goals from coaching from the ground of being, but it's the primary difference is the premise in which in how I see myself and how I see you if you were the client and how I see the world. And coaching from that premise has a little less stickiness to it. It has a little less egoic connection or stickiness, really, is what it is. And so the less identification with egoic movements, the more spaciousness there is, and the more, in my experience, the more transformative possibilities there are with the client.
I wonder if you could, we didn't talk about this before we started recording, but I wonder if you could maybe point us towards that in our experience right now, in some way, like whatever way you feel appropriate. I know, we can do a lot of spiritual practice to kind of get in touch with it, but might give people also who are the coaches listening who maybe are less familiar with it, a kind of just a little bit of a sense of it.
Sure. So a couple things come up for me with that request, and I'm happy to do that. My colleague Ted Strauss and I actually, on a separate side note, we've created a model called the I-Conscious Human Development Model. And in that model, it talks about just different stages of development that people are in. And within those stages of development, there are certain practices that tend to be appropriate for different stages of development. So I put the clause out there that I hesitate slightly to put out a very blanket practice that like this one will work for you, whatever that means, to help drop people into their own being. But I can take you through like a 3-minute or 2-minute guided meditation if that's what you're interested in.
Sure, let's do it. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. All right. So go ahead and just get comfortable in your chair and close your eyes. And feel your feet on the floor. And just rest your hands on top of your thighs. And just relax. And begin to feel your feet touching the floor. And the floor touching your feet. And feel your hands touching your legs and your legs touching your hands. See if you can feel your feet touching the floor and your hands touching your legs at the same time. Connecting the top from the bottom. Expanding awareness to feel in multiple locations. And just feel free to pause at any moment. If there's a point at which you don't follow me, that's totally okay. And just stay with the previous pointing that I'm pointing to. See if you can feel the spaciousness just below the surface of your skin throughout your body. And see if you can feel the space just outside of your body, like an inch above your skin. See if you can feel that space. Now see if you can feel the space about 5 feet all the way around your body, expanding your capacity for awareness outside of your skin. And we can take this as far out as you're ready for. You can take this to outside of your home or wherever you're sitting. Feel the spaciousness well beyond where you can see. And then bringing attention back to that space just outside your skin and see how that feels. What's it like to feel the space, to be aware of the space, that alive space outside of your skin? You're not confined to the inside of your skin. And now bring your attention to the inside. Feeling the insides from head to toe. Again, feeling your hands touch your thighs touch your hands. And feeling your feet on the ground, your feet touching the ground, and the ground touching your feet. And open your eyes when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we didn't plan that, so I appreciate your willingness to play.
Of course, of course.
And I think it's a beautiful way to give everybody listening, like a taste of this space that you're talking about and that you kind of advocating coaching from, rather than it just being an abstract concept for some people. So yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention, this is a lot on spaciousness and the becoming familiar with that element. There's also the element of which is kind of a different facet of the diamond, if you will, is the heart. What is it like to coach from an open heart versus a closed heart? And am I aware of when my heart is open versus closed? And what happens with that relationship with the client when the heart is open versus closed? That is another huge element to become aware of, and how we relate to each other, and the transformative possibilities when that heart is wide open. It creates a safety in that connection, where the client can explore the tough stuff, can explore the difficult things, can explore that which they would not go to on their own. That stuff is allowed to bubble up when there's a spaciousness and an open heart of safety. It's amazing what can happen.
So they can sort of feel an unconditional acceptance in some way from the coach.
Absolutely. That everything is okay. Nothing is a problem. Nothing is weird. Nothing is out of the box. Nothing is too much. Nothing is to be shamed about. It literally opens Pandora's box, that anything can come up, that needs to come up in a way that might not have had that all loving environment for it to come up, to be transformed and welcomed into the space. Most people push stuff down because they can't process it all. They can't feel it all. We have to feel everything in order for things to process fully through, and then to kind of be released of it. And release of it, is actually, it's okay for it to be here. It's all a part of the whole. But when we cut off certain parts, we feel that cut off sensation, which is life telling us you're cutting, you're dividing in ways that life is not divided. Life is unified. And so when we're cutting and dividing, we feel it in our body. It's like it's contracting. So to provide an open environment where love can really hold all of it is actually where things can come up to be fully seen and loved and healed and brought back into the whole. It's already here, but our capacity to acknowledge and accept it and be with it.
I kind of get the sense that if the coach can sit in this place of spaciousness and acceptance and presence and open-heartedness, that they can invite their client into that. And this is where they're kind of all the ways in which they contract or pull away from this life coming through them and being expressed is then, they can metabolize that in some way, that they begin to open up, become more expressed, and can then, be of service or have the kind of impact maybe they want to have in the world, but from a kind of non-strategic place.
Absolutely. It's just a mirroring effect. They can see their infinite nature when the coach shows up as this infinite nature. The person, it's just reflected. It's the same. It's no different in me than it is in them, or no different than you than in somebody else. It's just a reflection. So it's offering a space to have that experience and reflected back to them. And what often happens are the stuck dualities that their belief structures are holding on to, or their system is holding on to, tend to come up to be held and seen as rather than like a problem or a duality, as part of the whole. And then it no longer holds them back. You know, these, if I'm afraid of abandonment, say, if I'm afraid of abandonment, then if I'm holding that belief of fear, I will rearrange my life to not feel that. And I see this in every being on this planet. CEOs, doesn't matter. We're all doing it as human beings. Is whatever I don't want to feel and whatever is not welcomed, I will rearrange who I talk to, what I do, what I'm drawn to do, to avoid feeling that feeling. I mean, it's amazing what humans do to avoid feeling something. We think it's going to destroy us, or it's going to swallow us up, or whatever that is. But for instance, to help an executive to really see where these nuances are sticking them and prickling them and keeping them from moving forward in a very powerful way, I find to be one of the most essential elements for a CEO to live their deepest potential and to lead in a way that is most open and capable to have difficult conversations and go into difficult scenarios, and really just have a spaciousness where anything can be there, and strategic thinking can still be there. Their capacity for their emotional capacity is very high when they can feel everything that they need to feel in order to be in a room where, you know, high emotions are coming up or whatnot. So the cleaner the coach is, the cleaner the CEO is, the more that can come in, the more that can just be here, the more they'll be able to see, and the more they'll be able to be aware of that's actually already here, because there isn't a blocking system going on unconsciously.
Yeah, it's like all the kind of energy that it takes to defend or to cut parts off is liberated, you know.
Yes.
Like and yeah.
Yes, and you can see it in their face, you know, I mean, you can initially see the fear or the discomfort, and they'll often tell you, like, I hate this, or like, this is uncomfortable, but it's going through it. And on the other side is freedom, is liberation, is because they're reclaiming the other half of themselves that they've cut off. So as excruciating as it can be to kind of dive into some of these, like, I'm not good enough, or something's wrong with me, or something's missing, or a fear of failure. A lot of CEOs, it's a huge one, fear of failure. But you dive right into it. And on the other side of that is liberation and a fearlessness that is unbelievable. But until the client welcomes both sides of the paradox, like, I'm a failure, I'm not a failure, like, until we can hold both of those in the field, there will be that pushing away and pulling closer and avoiding and manipulating my behavior so that I don't have to feel one of the sides of the polarity.
Let's unpack that a little bit more, because I want to make sure people get a sense of what you mean there, like this polarity. I'm a failure, I'm not a failure. Are you saying that this is like often how our kind of, you know, maybe our, another word, use the term ego, because I think there's a healthy side of ego, but this more contracted, fear-based side operates, you know, in this dual way. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. So the more, first of all, I want to say, the more in tune one is with this within themselves, they will start to spot this in their clients. So it's very difficult to help guide your client through anything that you've not gone through yourself to some degree, or at least have a real visceral sense for it, at least. And the other thing is, you know, the feelings I'm avoiding in myself, I will avoid going into with my client. I see that a lot with coaches. So if I have not dealt with my fear of failure, or my fear of not good enough, or whatever the belief structure is, it will be extremely difficult for me to have the desire or capacity to dive into that with you, and to hold that with you as you explore failure. I mean, so the more you've dealt with on your own side as a coach, the more you'll be able to deal with anything that arises with the client in a way that allows for their process to be clean and open, and love without contraction from the coach. You know, the coach's system is contracting. It shifts the capacities in the space for the client.
Yeah, beautiful.
I don't even know if I answered your question. What was your question?
Yeah. Well, I was asking you about, you know, this duality you spoke of like being a fear of being a failure, you know, being success or whatever, how that shows up. And I think you partially answered it. I just wanted to make sure that the people listening got a sense of how that might be. And
Got it.
what I love about what you're saying is that because we started off talking about this spaciousness that actually maybe we're not who we usually think we are. That maybe we're not this kind of collection of thoughts and sort of sensations inside our head or whatever. There was something much bigger than that.
Right.
And what I like about what you're saying is also it's about being with what is here too. Like it's not about pushing something away or denying it, or like you mentioned the term in your book, like I love Robert Master's work too, like spiritual bypassing, how that's another danger if we get hold of these ideas and we want to just push stuff away. So I love how you're talking about it's about welcoming feeling and sensation and all these parts of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say too, I love how you're talking about just the spaciousness. It is the ground of being. It's the ground where all of this can arise. And so the clearer the coach is seeing themselves as this vastness, then there is so much room for anything to come and go. If I identify exclusively as this body, this just physical being, then emotions come up and they just can take me over. They just like a fear comes up and it's like my body just crumbles and I just like I can't move, I can't do a whole lot. But when there's a spaciousness and identification with and as, then these thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensations can come, and they can be difficult and uncomfortable, but they don't. You have access to something larger that can hold all of that. So once somebody has had an awakening to consciousness in this way that we're speaking of, then the capacity to handle the deep polarities is much higher. So for most people, the deepest kind of core polarities are typically something's wrong with me or something's missing. There's usually something around that. That's usually like the root of all the other beliefs that grow off of that, grow off of that tree. So my capacity to hold polarity will determine basically how much I can help you explore what you're cutting off and pushing away. And the cutting off and pushing away is really the discomfort, and it's really the limitations, because I'm cutting off, and I am mentally and perhaps even viscerally blocking and cutting out, which is always uncomfortable because you're blocking and cutting out part of, one, what's already here, and two, it's a part of you. So it's uncomfortable because you're saying no. And when we say no to life and say no to part of who I am, the body will tell you like that's not true, and it's uncomfortable. So we get these kind of notifications from our physical system letting us know when we've cut off parts of ourselves. And so as a coach, part of my work is helping people welcome home all of themselves. They can feel this liberation that they are, and feel the capacity for any thought, feeling, emotion, sensation to come and go. And it doesn't knock you over. The only reason it knocks you over or it alters your behavior is because in that moment you've exclusively identified as it. So as a thought comes up around, say, failure, I'm a failure. If that thought comes up and just completely takes over your capacity to see anything but that, your whole system will follow. I mean, you become identified as that. But can we back up and have a little more spaciousness? And can the feeling or the thought come up of failure while I'm also aware of something else? That way it doesn't take us. We're aware of it, but we're not exclusively identified as it to where it owns us.
Yeah, beautiful. So presumably, you said like we're not identified with it. We can feel it come up and it arises. What happens as people are able to do that more, like to that thought or that feeling?
I love that. Have you, so I'll flip it around and ask you a question. Have you ever had a feeling or sensation come up where you just felt like you were swallowed up by it and you couldn't get out of it? And whether it was doubt or insecurity or something like that? Has that ever come up for you?
No, never, never, never. No. Of course, yeah, for sure, for sure.
So starting from there, we've all experienced being swallowed up. We've all experienced this, like, just taken over by fear and nothing, that we truly believe that we have something to be afraid of, and to only be afraid completely of that, whatever that is. And so the second question is, have you ever then had that same sensation arise in a way, though, that this time that there's it's almost like somebody is watching from the back, like you're watching from the back of your head as this arises, and there's a little more spaciousness between the observer and the sensation or the thought or the image. People tend to have physical sensations that arise, or they have words that come across, like, I'm not good enough. Like it actually comes in words, or they come in images. So there are different ways that people experience these, what I call thought forms. And so I'm curious, like, have you ever then that same, like, pick one, not good enough, or what would be
like I'm not, I don't deserve to be here. Like that's
a good
one
one.
that
That's a
I've
good one.
had to,
Yeah,
a juicy one. Huh?
I'm
not enough. Like
I'm not enough. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a really popular one.
Yeah.
I'm not enough. And so, so you've probably felt that in your body, and kind of just, what was your experience when that comes through you?
Yeah, sure. Like then there's a contraction, a hesitation. I feel like, apologetic or something. It's like, oh, can I be here? Like, sorry to bother you. There's hesitation, doubt.
Yeah. So it kind of permeates your whole system, and then your thoughts, your words, your feelings, your everything, your behaviors start to change. Prior to
Yes.
that thought, you were just fine. You weren't adjusting and manipulating and changing the way you were showing up. So have you ever then had that same I'm not enough arise in a way where there's space and you see it, but you don't feel the body altering necessarily its behavior immediately?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm speaking of, is once we start to get some space from it, and we're no longer exclusively identified as it, because consciousness, I can see it. And therefore now I can make a choice. I can choose to dive into it and live it out, or I can feel it, allow it to be here, and work with it. And so until we almost disidentify with it to where we can observe it with spaciousness, then we don't really have choice.
Yeah.
So as soon as this comes up, now we can see it and be with it and allow it to be here, and we can play with the truth of it and that sort of thing. And that's where transformation really happens, is when we there's a little more spaciousness with it, and we can kind of work with it.
I'm super curious if you could say something about like the liberation of potential that can happen. I get that if we we start to see that we're not just our thinking, and we begin to be able to orient from this ground of being, and there's a spaciousness, and thoughts or sensations arise, and we don't get hooked by them, and they liberate. And I wonder if there's still a sense of personalness, or maybe even like a calling or a purpose that may exist. Is it that we just become like bland, kind of like nothingness, like when I first started reading Krishnamurti, and I just got depressed because I was like, I'm just gonna. There's nothing to.
There's nothing to do. There's nothing to see. I'm nobody. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. It's a stage I think a lot of people go through when they've had some sort of an awakening, is what we're talking about, a consciousness awakening to itself as itself. It couldn't be further from the truth. In my experience, my personal experience in working with a ton of people, the more one wakes up in their whole system, their whole being wakes up, consciousness wakes up, the mind wakes up, the heart wakes up, and they each have their own kind of distinct awakening. The more in touch you are with who you are as your unique creature, your unique being, your unique way of giving on this planet and being on this planet, the cleaner it is actually, and the more alive it is, the more vivid it is. It doesn't have to mute. It can actually come alive even more. My colleague Ted Strauss and I talk about this a lot with our I Conscious model. We have 5 domains on our model because one thing we're noticing is a lot of people are just focusing on a consciousness awakening to this ground of being. And then some people's hearts are shut off, or the body's not awakened, or so they're kind of partial parts that are open and others that aren't. And uniqueness was one of those. How much are people really living their full unique capacities? It's full potential, living your full potential. In my experience, is how awake is the system, how awake is the system from head to toe, which then liberates actually the system to move cleaner and freer and smoother and in more flow in one's unique purpose on this planet, a unique way of inhabiting life and interacting with life. So in our model, we have 5 domains. It's consciousness, uniqueness, emotions, mind, and body. And we find that all 5 of these are extremely important for people to really become aware of in themselves, and particularly as a coach. How embodied am I? Or how free am I of the thinking mind? If I'm not that free of the thinking mind and thoughts are fluttering, how deeply present can I even really be with you? If I'm entertaining thoughts as they're passing through consciousness, or if I'm entertaining all these emotions that are coming up and identifying with them, I'm now more stuck in my own subjective experience, and I'm not even relating with you. I'm not even connected to you because I'm dealing with my own subjective stuff. So the more a coach is free in their own system from head to toe, the more they can just be a radiant open system to reflect back your radiant open system to help facilitate any kind of whatever that needs to come up for you, that I can be more fully available. So uniqueness is one of my actually favorite elements of it, because once consciousness has kind of had an awakening, uniqueness really flourishes in a way that's just a different quality than prior to the system opening. It doesn't mean that prior to some sort of awakening, you can't live your purpose, or you don't know your uniqueness, or you don't know what your gifts are, your talents. It's not that at all. But there's a different quality to it once somebody has expanded their sense of identification.
I wonder what that different quality is. I get that it's in some way freed up from maybe a lot of the limited ways that we've been caught inside of ourselves, and these divisions that you spoke of earlier, and the fears and the polarities. It's certainly all of that. If that's all let go of a lot more, then there's a different quality to this uniqueness.
Absolutely. And I know myself as this infinite nature. I know myself as not confined. So how would my purpose be expressed in the world if I didn't see myself as a separate entity from me, from you, from me to the world? And what would happen with my unique purpose if I didn't think I needed to fix the world, if everything was a problem, something was wrong with it? I mean, most people tend to give in the world from a place of lack. They tend to give to the world from a place of, there's something wrong with it, I need to fix it. Oof. We are perpetuating duality. Even in our sweet efforts to give, we're giving from a place of, there's something wrong with you, I need to help you. And as a coach, it's something to be extremely alert to, is how am I showing up for this person? Do I think I need to help them? Do I think I need to fix them? Do I think there's something wrong with them and I can just get in there and heal them? We're then approaching them from a place of, there's something wrong with you. So now we're perpetuating this belief of, there's something wrong with you. And that becomes our premise of coaching. And that's not necessarily the best premise, versus kind of from this awakened ground of being, I can now sit with you in wholeness and know damn well that there is nothing wrong with you on one level. And I'm going to sit here with you while we kind of slice through some of the belief structures that are inhibiting you from experiencing your own wholeness, your own connection to yourself, your own connection to others in life. So that's one of the biggest differences actually in how coaching can look from traditional coaching to perhaps from an awakened sense is I'm coaching from wholeness. I'm not coaching from duality or broken or needing to fix or there's something wrong with you. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces that come up in that realm.
I think it's worth just, unpacking this a bit further, because I think it's so important what you're saying, that because I've noticed that in my coaching too, the difference between when I come from an agenda, either my agenda to be a good coach or to get the client somewhere, for them to be a success or me to be a success, or just that can basically create sort of corral consciousness. It creates a sense of lack, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
We're forced into going in a certain direction, and then it suddenly starts to filter all the novelty and the potentiality that exists in this moment right now. If we dare to kind of dance between the known and the unknown, and not to fix things, and allow consciousness to reveal itself, in our relationship. They're just two very different stances, I think. And I think, you said, you started by saying that's where the magic can happen. I think that's a beautiful phrase for the difference between those two. But if you dare to let go of knowing what the answer is or where you're going to go, then really remarkable, extraordinary things can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not like I just show up and just sit there, I mean, I also want to mention that, there are coaching skill sets and techniques that are useful, that come into play naturally. Once that skill set has been kind of obtained and practiced in the ground of being, these spontaneously come out. I mean, there are times, I know a lot of coaches are taught, like, for example, like never give advice. You should never give advice. You should always just ask questions and inquire and solicit it out of the client. To me, it's a yes and. Yes, there's a time to ask questions, and yes, there's a time actually where it's like, I consider this, and that just often comes up. When I go in with an agenda, I can feel it in my body after a while because it's uncomfortable. And oftentimes the client will start to push back, or you can energetically, I'm obviously much more sensitive now to the responses the client is giving me when I might have a subtle energy that I might not be as aware of. And it could be even to, I want you to feel okay. And I have to learn to drop that. I need to be okay with them not feeling okay. I need to be okay with them hating this session. I need to be okay with them hating me possibly in the session. I need to be okay with them not having a transformative experience and wanting me to come back. I need to be okay with the agenda of any of those is just fine. So yeah, I think checking one's agenda, checking one's deeper levels of what I want. What do I want as a coach? Do I need them to make me feel like I'm an amazing coach? Do I need money? Am I dependent on this person to have income? That's a big one for a lot of people. Being liked is a big one. Feeling successful, making sure the client reaches their goal. If you don't reach your goal, then I feel like a failure. So you have to reach your goal. So now my agenda is to really shove you along the way to make sure that you reach your goal, so that I feel that I don't have to feel like a failure. So there's all these little subtle ways that these things come up. But what would it be like to literally not have an agenda? Now I can prepare. I prepare for my clients. I work with some execs and top execs, and I certainly do my homework to well prepare myself. And when I sit down, I let it all go. And if that preparation needs to come in, it always does. It will come in. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. So when I sit down with them, I just am open. And my first question is typically, what's up for you? And then we work right from there is what is up for you right now? What is up in this present moment for you? That needs to first be welcomed into the room. And sometimes that's the doorway then to dive into something else. But my coaching sessions have gone all over the board in ways and places that I never would have imagined. So the more open one can be to letting that session go where it needs to go, and you are not in control. That's another big one for a coach, is you have to let go of control in order to allow yourself to live and move and breathe from this ground of being, and not need to come in and contract in order to cattle this, hurt it in a way. Can I be okay with messiness? How comfortable I am with my own messiness often is a reflection of how much messiness I will allow to arise in you. And that's obviously where a lot of the magic is me giving you the total freedom to just show up however you are, whatever's here for you. Totally fine with me. Not only totally fine, but like, I'm not surprised. I've seen it all. When a client feels that, then they relax, because then they can relax. They don't know what's going to come up sometimes, but if they're afraid that you can't hold a piece of them, then they will often keep that down, consciously or unconsciously. So how vast of a field can you offer to where anything can arise and you're not shocked one bit? You're like, wow, there's that. Cool. Let's be with that. That relaxes their system in a way that, because then they don't have to guard themselves and, like they do with themselves on their own. They guard themselves. I want to, keep this feeling in a black box down below, and it's not allowed to come out. But when there's a relaxed field of openness where everything is okay and everything is allowed to arise and nothing is a problem, that's where the magic happens. And I'm not seeing you separate from me. I'm not feeling you separate from me. I'm not pushing you away. I'm seeing you perfect and whole and complete and not needing anything. Nothing's wrong with you. Nothing needs to be fixed with you. So I'm coming from there while also seeing the human. I'm seeing the hurt. I'm seeing the pain. I'm seeing where you might be stuck. I'm seeing the duality in your system. I'm seeing both. So I'm not just seeing the broken, if you will, and I'm not just seeing this vast, nothing's wrong with you, you're totally fine, I don't know why you're here with me. I'm holding it all. And that is meeting somebody there, and holding all of them. It's holding their form and holding their formlessness, if you will.
Well, maybe that's where the real magic is, though. Maybe like that.
Absolutely.
The form and the formlessness. That they're this human being. With all their kind of baggage and conditioning and idiosyncrasies, and they're this vast open space of potential.
Absolutely. And if I were to do a second version of my book, it would be moving into that. It would be, it was a dissertation for my PhD in professional coaching and human development. And so a lot of the book came from that. And so I was honed in on the ground of being as the premise. But if I were to expand that book now, it would include the I conscious model, basically, and how to hold people from all of these levels and into all stages of development, which is not just about the ground of being. It's about holding their humanity, holding the parts that are grieving, holding the parts that don't feel good enough, that they don't feel that they can handle holding on their own. Otherwise they wouldn't be pushing it down. They wouldn't be kind of not, blinding themselves or shoving it in the shadow boxes. They'd be willing to pull it out. So being present with people in a way that holds all of them, that's true unity. Awakening to consciousness as consciousness. If that's a start, and there's a lot more. You have a heart, you have a body, you have a uniqueness, and what would it be like to awaken to all of that and move from all of that? So coaching from all of that, coaching from the ground of being and your messy humanness that I want to be with. I want to be with that part, and I'm going to hold it from out here, though. I'm going to know this. I'm going to see this vastness as I'm holding the rest of your humanity. And so they're both here. They're both always here. It's just a matter of what are we attending to? What are we aware of? What are we paying attention to in any given moment? In any given moment, am I experiencing infinity? Am I experiencing that aspect of myself that is boundless, absolutely boundless, and not confined to this body at all? And can I be attuned also to this physical messiness? It's all, in a sense, it's all the same thing on one level, and they appear very like Okay, can they simultaneously exist? And so as one evolves, you know, I am just this body, there is no infinity, to, oh my God, I am just infinity. And then there is no body. And then there's kind of the dropping down. Consciousness really kind of drops down into the system and inhabits where it feels like the simultaneous, like you can't even separate them. Like, of course, this body, this physical sense is here, while also this infinite nature is absolutely here. Like, it's undeniable.
I
Yeah.
just want to say, because for people, we're talking about awakening, and I think people can get an idea of like, I've got to sit on a meditation cushion for like decades and decades, or it's for the special few, the Buddha,
Oh.
Jesus. And I think we live in really exciting times, and my experience is that there's so much kind of spiritual technology out there these days, and you're talking about this model you guys have created. And I love that model because there's more and more ways that people can get specific, like this specificity around where are they at? What would be the right kind of practice for me right now? And that you can actually get traction very quickly. That actually I want to say to people, yeah, if you start doing these injunctions, you can get traction quite quickly, and that because you've got the right kind of tool for you at the moment. I think where people have gone wrong is that they've often sat with practices for a long time that aren't quite the right practice for them.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there because, people might be like, okay, this thing that they're talking about is for the chosen few, but it's not for me. It's not.
No, I have chills all over my body hearing you talk about this because it's so true. It's accessible to everybody. We are in a time where you don't have to leave your home and family and life and career and go sit on a mountaintop for 50 years to discover who you are. You don't have to do that anymore. Nor do you have to sit on a cushion for the rest of your life. Everybody's practice, if you will, is different. And everybody's stage of development is different. One of the reasons I was so drawn to map out this process is first of all, I've seen so many people go through it. And so I just started to see the patterns over and over and over of this, as did my colleague Ted, which is why we teamed up. And we just realized like, wow, there are, most people are either focused on just this consciousness awakening and they don't know where they are in the process. They start with one teacher and then they kind of either get stuck in that same teachings for 50 years, or they wander and they're kind of like the buffet of teachers and they go to like 50 different teachers within like a year's period or whatever. And people are just trying to find their way. They're trying to find what works for them. And so we wanted to create this model that helped people understand where they are in this process, not only in their awakening to consciousness, but in their uniqueness and emotional intelligence, in mind and thought and cognitive capacities, as well as the body. How embodied am I? How connected am I to this system? Or am I disembodied and in my mind and up and out? And so we wanted to create a clear path. And I say clear path, it's fuzzy for everybody, no matter how you slice it, no matter how great of a model you develop. People are going to be kind of moving all over it in some way. But when you pull back and you look at it from a meta perspective, it's a really useful tool to help guide people down a certain way. And they can find their own way within that way. But rather than kind of, pulling out this teacher and reading this book and going to this retreat, this gives a little bit more focus on what resources might be useful for that individual at that time and for that domain of their being. Most humans tend to lean into and focus on the domain that feels best to them, that they feel good at, that is most at ease for them, and they completely neglect the one that it brings up shame, discomfort, not good enough, all that stuff. We tend to neglect that. So in the West, for example, we tend to neglect the heart. We tend to neglect emotions. And we overemphasize mind. And some people have gotten into consciousness. And so everybody's kind of results, if you will, as to where they fall in the model and what they're focusing in on is different. And so if you can really find out where you fall in this model, where you fall in your own developmental process, it can give you specific practices, and you can find teachers and things like that are appropriate for where you are in that level of development in that domain of your being. So that was kind of desire, if you will, that was arising out of wanting to develop this model, was to help give some kind of path for people to find the right resources at the right time, and to have what we call a whole being awakening. It's not just about a consciousness awakening. It's about your whole being. Because awakening is like I love to describe it as like a diamond. And, each facet is a little bit different. So consciousness awakening is like one facet of the diamond. A heart or emotion awakening is a different flavor, as is kind of a gut awakening or a body awakening. So, and a uniqueness awakening, awakening out of partiality, awakening out of duality, out of division, and into your uniqueness from a greater sense of who you are. And that shows up very different in the world.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this. You mentioned if coaches open their hearts, and that can be incredibly powerful. What could be your point to some of the signs of how that shows up for people? How do people know when their hearts are opening? And I guess that in a way, one of the answers is, well, you just know, yeah? Mm-hmm. It's like, because you experience it from the inside out. So,
yeah.
But, yeah.
I think you feel connected, you feel love, you feel openness. Even when the heart's open, you can still feel guilt, shame. That stuff can still come up, but it's coming from an open-hearted space. There's no separation between me and you. There's no, it really is a felt sense. It's hard to say. And the more in tune you are with your own heart kind of opening and closing, the more in tune you'll be with your client. And when the client's heart is starting to close, how can you sit with them in a way that opens them? Because an open system is where change can happen. If their heart is closed, you'll have a cognitive conversation with them, and you can exchange thoughts, you can exchange ideas, which can sometimes be useful. The mind is useful. It's just a matter of, if that's the only thing we have access to, then we're just limited in what we can do. When the heart awakens, there is an in-loveness with everything. There's an intimacy with everything. You are everything. There's a fullness. There's a connection beyond connection. It's not even like something, there's no longer you connecting with something else. There's just a felt sense of seamlessness. There's a flow, total flow when it comes to coaching. When both hearts are open, there's just a natural ease to the flow. There's no glitches of thinking coming up in a way that contracts the system. That can happen when the heart is wide open in both systems. There's a flow that takes place. But with the heart awakening, it really is an in-loveness with everything, an intimacy with everything, a felt sense of intimacy with everything. It's a knowing, but from a different space than from a consciousness awakened spacious knowing. It's a different sense. And they're all here. It's just sometimes we're more aware of one than another at certain times. It can all be felt at the same time as well. And just as in coaching, you don't just have to meet somebody with the heart, you can meet somebody with the mind as well. Like when both systems are kind of online, if you will, you've got the heart of gold, the heart of love, and you have a sword of truth. It's like both are needed in coaching. And heart sometimes leads in a way that facilitates, and other times like the sword of truth is really what's needed. And they're both here, but one can sometimes be lean in a little more.
I'd love to ask you about that. You keep speaking about what's it like when I'm with my client, and I wondered if you could, let me see if I can formulate this question. Like, just kind of describe to us, like, what is it like when you're opposite your clients, and you're in this kind of spaciousness or with open-heartedness, and maybe there's a sense of attunement. What's that like for you, and what do you like? What's guiding you, or what are you looking for? I don't know if you can answer that, but I'd love to know. Like, like how, the question: how do you know you're going in the right direction? Right. Maybe that comes from the mind. But
I don't know if I'm going in the right direction per se, but when I'm when my system is fully available, then I'm going in the right direction. I have no idea where it's going sometimes, but when my system is open and available, I have a sensation of heading in the right direction. Like this interaction, whatever needs to come from this interaction will come of this interaction. And like I said, it's gone in a zillion different directions. And so that's kind of typically how I feel it to be. And what I'm looking for, I don't know if I'm looking for anything. What I see is I see thoughts. I see emotions arise sometimes before they're even aware of it. I hear and I feel dualities, and where there's a duality, there's a stuck and a contraction that's inhibiting awareness in that moment of their fullness. And so I often ask a very direct question from love. That's the key, is the heart has to be open. If you ask a question about a duality that's direct when the heart is closed, the client will often get defended. They'll get pissed off. They'll feel hurt. They'll feel all these things. It's way different when it's coming from love. I can ask the most direct question straight into the heart of the most painful thing in their being in that moment. But if it's coming from spacious, open love, that's where the magic is. So the heart being opened is paramount to coaching. If you're especially coaching, any coaching, but especially in coaching when one can see that the dualities and really pull them out and help the client look at them. They are not going to want to look at any sort of, I'm a failure. Yeah, let's explore I'm a failure when the heart's closed. Oof, no way. It's not safe. It's not okay. And the processing needs to go through the whole system anyway. So that's what I see when I'm sitting with a client is I tend to see the thoughts that stick them, and I see the dualities that are still in the system that are causing them to behave differently, think differently, act differently, lead their whole company in a way that is inhibiting, that is not as free and open. If I'm afraid of conflict because of whatever reason, can you imagine what it would be like as a CEO if you're afraid of conflict or if you're afraid of failure? And can you imagine what that would be like if you're a CEO and you're running a company and you have no fear of failure? That you're okay when failure shows up? Wow, that's a very different way of being and leading an entire company. It will shift the whole system. It will shift the CEO. It'll shift the direct reports, their executive team, and it will shift culture. And which is why I chose executive coaching, is because of that, because I can see where the power of that one person and how it can affect an entire system when the clearer they are and the more awakened their system is, and the more powerful they will be on this planet. And that's where my interest lies, is to help people unravel these pieces of duality that they're identifying with or pushing away that cause contraction away, that they're not then aware of their capacities, their full potential. Yeah. If you're a coach, it doesn't mean you're not doing good work if you haven't had this experience in coming from the ground of being or whatever. It's not that there's still good that can happen. It's just good to be aware that as I sit down with this client or as I approach the world, am I coming with a sense of, I need to help you, there's something wrong with you, I need to fix you. It's just something to be aware of. It's just something to notice and just to say, oh, there that is for me. Okay, I'm aware of that. Let me now be with them from a little bit, agendaless space. So it's something, coach, we're all growing and evolving as well. So the more aware we are of our own stuff, the more cleanly we can be with our clients. And so as we talked about, like the being and doing, the doing, evolving, human, messy side is always growing, evolving. And there's stuff that comes up for us to kind of see and work with. So it's not like you have to be perfect in order to go coach somebody. It's just the more aware you are of your own subjective experience and identification, the coaching sessions will, shift accordingly.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed our time together today. It's flown by. I feel like there's a million questions I could ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could just share with us a little bit more about how we can, find out about the cool work that you're up to. Yeah, I love this model that you've created. Where can we find out about what you're up to?
Yeah, so my website is drcarolegriggs.com. And that's where I just have kind of everything that I'm up to is on there. So coaching and consulting, the eye conscious stuff. I'm also part of a project called Loving AI, which we didn't touch into too much today, but maybe on another time we
That's a
can
whole
dive
other
into
conversation. I want
that.
to, yeah.
And there's a few other things on there. But then the model that you can find is at iConscious, like iPhone, iConscious.global. And there's a free tour of the model, an audio tour, and actually visual tour. There's a tour of the guided self-assessment. So if you want to take an assessment to find out where you fall in your developmental path in each of these 5 domains, you can take an assessment for $15. And it will give you a full results sheet. And we are actually soon going to have, the model will be interactive. So if you find out you're in consciousness chapter 10 and emotions chapter 12, and then you'll be able to go in there and click on that box, where it meets, and it'll open into all these resources to help you get to the next level. So it'll have audios, videos, practices, teachers, retreats that are going on, pitfalls, challenges, all the things that you're going to bump into at that stage of development in that domain of your being. And so it'll be in a forum. We're going to have an interactive forum, and people can add their own resources, and people can thumb them up, thumb them down. And so the cream of the crop rises to the top. So the best practices will be available for everybody, probably coming in January. So all of that you can find on iConscious.global.
That is so important. I get so excited. I mean, I'm a geek around this stuff, but aside from that, like I said earlier, it's so powerful that people are able to do that and find best practices and appropriate practices. I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
I want to see it really thrive. So
thank you.
The next time we'll get Ted on as well, and we can talk more together. That could be fun too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, it's Joel here again. I hope you've been inspired by this topic. I'd love to get the word out about this podcast. So if you feel like that's something you want to do, then you can head to coachesrising.com/podcasts. You'll see all the other podcasts there, but on each individual page on the right-hand side, there's a share bar there, and you can just click on that, and it's really easy to put it on social media. Or you could just simply tell other coaches about it. I'd really appreciate that. And we're going to be adding new podcasts to this series every fortnight. So stay tuned. We'll be speaking to more pioneers and thought leaders in the field of impactful and effective coaching.